Welcome to Poirot Stories, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings captivating mysteries to life. In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Hall, a scream pierces the night. Eleanor Ashbourne, a young heiress, lies dead in the rose garden. A silk cord around her neck, a broken locket glinting in the moonlight. Who betrayed her trust? Was it her dashing fiancé, hiding a lover's rage? The secretive butler with a deadly loyalty, or her own mother, guarding a scandalous secret? Join Hercule Poirot, the master detective, as he unravels a web of lies where every clue, a crushed rose, a scratched lock, a cryptic note, leads to a shocking truth. Will you guess the killer before Poirot's little grey cells reveal all? Chapter 1. The Gathering at Blackthorn Hall. In the waning light of an autumn afternoon in 1932, Blackthorn Hall stood resolute against the encroaching dusk, its ivy-clad towers casting long shadows over the manicured lawns of the Devonshire estate. The air carried the crisp bite of October, and the distant bleat of sheep from the moors mingled with the faint clink of teacups from the drawing-room. It was a scene of impeccable English gentility, yet beneath the polished surface, a quiet unease simmered, as if the very stones of the hall sensed the storm to come. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion, adjusted his tie in the mirror of his guest room, his reflection betraying a flicker of curiosity. He had been summoned to Blackthorn Hall by an old acquaintance, Sir Reginald Ashbourne, a retired diplomat with a penchant for grand gatherings. The invitation, penned in Sir Reginald's precise hand, had promised a weekend of stimulating company and fine conversation. Hastings, never one to resist the lure of a country house weekend, had accepted with enthusiasm, though he wondered why Sir Reginald had been so insistent that he bring along his friend, Hercule Poirot. "Poirot, my dear fellow, are you quite certain you wish to attend?" Hastings had asked the previous week, as they sat in Poirot's immaculate London flat. These affairs can be dreadfully dull. Bridge, gossip, and too much sherry. Poirot, polishing his patent leather shoes with a monogrammed cloth, had raised an eyebrow. "Mon cher Hastings, where there are people, there is the cast of characters, with the keen eye of one accustomed to Poirot's methods. There was Dr. Malcolm Trent, a neurologist, with a sharp gaze and a habit of tapping his cigarette case. Miss Clara Vane, a young actress whose laughter rang a touch too bright, and Mr. Gerald Warwick, a dour financier who clutched his whiskey as if it were a lifeline. Among them moved the Ashbourne's daughter, Eleanor, a pale beauty of 25, whose eyes darted nervously as though expecting an unseen blow. Her fiancé, Captain Lionel Brooke, a dashing military man, stood protectively at her side, his jaw set with a soldier's resolve. The butler, Mr. Grayson, a man of impeccable decorum with a face like weathered parchment, announced dinner at precisely 7 o'clock. The guests filed into the dining room, where a long mahogany table gleamed under candlelight. The meal was exquisite: roast pheasant, creamed potatoes, and a claret that Hastings found particularly fine. But the conversation felt strained, punctuated by awkward silences. Sir Reginald spoke of his collection of rare manuscripts, housed in the Hall's library, with a pride that bordered on obsession. Lady Beatrice countered with brittle remarks about the cost of maintaining such treasures. Eleanor, seated opposite Hastings, barely touched her food, her fingers twisting a napkin into knots. As the dessert course arrived, a delicate lemon soufflé, the door to the dining room opened, and a small, immaculate figure stepped inside. Hercule Poirot, resplendent in a perfectly tailored dinner jacket, his moustache waxed to a razor's edge, surveyed the room with eyes that missed nothing. A murmur of surprise rippled through the guests. Sir Reginald had not mentioned Poirot's attendance. "My apologies for my tardiness," Poirot said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "A matter of the train, you understand. But I am here now, and I thank you, Sir Reginald, for your most gracious invitation." Sir Reginald rose, his smile warm, but his eyes guarded. "Monsieur Poirot, a delight to have you. Come, join us. Grayson, a place for our distinguished guest." Poirot took his seat beside Hastings, who whispered, "You've made quite the entrance, old." A gramophone played a soft waltz. Eleanor excused herself early, claiming a headache, and Captain Brooke followed, his expression unreadable. Lady Beatrice retired soon after, her smile as brittle as ever. Sir Reginald invited the men for cigars in the library, but Poirot declined, citing a need for rest after his journey. As Hastings and Poirot ascended the staircase to their rooms, Hastings could not shake a sense of foreboding. "Something's off, Poirot," he murmured. "This place, it's too perfect." Like a stage set for a tragedy, Poirot paused, his hand on the banister, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You are not wrong, mon ami. The air here, it is thick with secrets. The little grey cells, they are already at work. Tomorrow we shall see what lies beneath this veneer of civility." In his room, Hastings lay awake, the creaks of the old house mingling with the distant howl of the wind. Blackthorn Hall, for all its grandeur, felt like a chessboard, its pieces poised for a move that would shatter the fragile calm. And Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, was already watching the game unfold. Chapter 2. The Shadow Falls. The morning sun struggled through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Hall, casting a feeble glow over the breakfast room where the guests assembled at 8:30. The air was thick with the scent of kedgeree and toast, but the atmosphere was far less appetizing. A palpable tension hung over the table, as though the polite chatter of the previous evening had been a mere rehearsal for something darker. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the window with a cup of strong coffee, observed the gathering with a growing sense of disquiet. Sir Reginald Ashburn presided at the head of the table, his silver moustache gleaming as he spoke of the day's plans, a walk across the moors perhaps, or a tour of his prized manuscript collection. Yet his joviality seemed forced, his eyes darting toward the empty chair where his daughter, Eleanor, should have been. Lady Beatrice, her lips pressed into a thin line, buttered her toast with mechanical precision. The other guests, Dr. Malcolm Trent, Miss Clara Vane, Mr. Gerald Warwick, and Captain Lionel Idle. Those sharp green eyes missed nothing. The tremor in Clara Vane's hand as she reached for the marmalade. The way Dr. Trent's gaze lingered on Lady Beatrice. Or the faint sheen of sweat on Gerald Warwick's brow, despite the cool morning. The meal was interrupted by a sudden commotion from the hall. The butler, Mr. Grayson, appeared in the doorway, his usually impassive face pale and taut. "Sir Reginald," he said, his voice low but urgent, "you must come at once. It's Miss Eleanor." The room froze. Sir Reginald rose, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "What is it, Grayson? Speak, man." Grayson hesitated, his eyes darting to the guests. She's been found, sir. In the rose garden. I'm afraid she's dead." A collective gasp swept the table. Lady Beatrice let out a strangled cry, her hand clutching her throat, while Captain Brooke surged to his feet, his face ashen. "Dead?" he demanded. "What do you mean, dead? I saw her only last night." Grayson's voice trembled. "It appears to be unnatural, sir. I've sent for the police." Chaos erupted. Clara Vane pressed a handkerchief to her lips, her eyes wide with shock. Dr. Trent stood, muttering something about offering medical assistance, though his hands shook as he pushed back his chair. Gerald Warwick remained seated, his expression unreadable, though his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. Sir Reginald, his face drained of colour, strode toward the door, barking orders for Grayson to lead the way. Poirot, however, remained seated, his fingers steepled before him, "Hastings," he murmured, "accompany them, if you please. Observe everything, the body, the surroundings, the reactions of all. The little grey cells, they require data." Hastings nodded, his military instincts kicking in, and followed the group as they hurried through the French doors to the rose garden. The scene was one of cruel beauty. The garden, framed by crimson and white blooms, lay bathed in morning mist. But at its center, sprawled across a stone bench, was Eleanor Ashbourne. Her pale blue dress was stained. Ground around the bench was soft, but no clear footprints stood out in the dew-soaked grass. A small silver locket, its chain broken, lay a few feet away, glinting in the sunlight. As the group stood in stunned silence, the distant wail of a police siren announced the arrival of Inspector Hargreaves, a stocky man with a bristling moustache and a no-nonsense air. He surveyed the scene with a practiced eye, barking orders to his constables to secure the garden and question the staff. Turning to Sir Reginald, he said, "We'll need statements from everyone, sir. No one leaves the hall until we've got to the bottom of this." Poirot, who had joined them silently, inclined his head toward the inspector. "Monsieur l'inspecteur, I am Hercule Poirot. Perhaps I may be of assistance." Hargreaves frowned, clearly unaccustomed to civilian interference. "Poirot? The detective fellow? Heard of you? All right, you can observe, but don't get in my way." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "I assure you, Inspector, I am most unobtrusive. But the truth, it is not always found in the obvious places." As the police began their work, Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers hovering over the cord and the locket without touching them. He studied the crushed rose, the angle of Eleanor's head, the faint scratches on her hands. "Curious," he murmured to Hastings. "The cord, it is not from the garden. And the locket, why is it broken yet not taken? There is method here, mon ami, but also passion." Hastings shivered, the weight of the tragedy settling over him. Who could do this, Poirot? She was so young, so vibrant. Poirot rose, dusting his knees with a handkerchief. "That, Hastings, is what we shall discover. The rose garden, it is a stage, and Eleanor Ashbourne was not meant to leave it alive. But who wrote this grim play? That is the question." As the police cordoned off the garden and the guests were ushered back to the hall, Hastings glanced at Poirot, whose eyes gleamed with that familiar intensity. The game, as Poirot would call it, had begun. And Blackthorn Hall, presence causing a stir among the guests. Sir Reginald, his face haggard, had greeted him with a curt nod, while Lady Beatrice's eyes widened in recognition. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "you were not expected until this afternoon." "How fortuitous," Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "Fortuitous, perhaps, madame, but the affairs of Hercule Poirot are often guided by a certain intuition. Sir Reginald's invitation was most pressing, and I find myself here at a moment of great need." Hastings, catching the subtle emphasis in Poirot's words, knew his friend had sensed something amiss even before the tragedy. The invitation, delivered to Poirot's London flat with an almost desperate urgency, had hinted at more than a mere social gathering. Now, with Eleanor Ashbourne's lifeless body in the rose garden, that hint had become a scream. Inspector Hargreaves, his notebook in hand, began questioning the guests, his brusque manner doing little to ease the tension. "Right then," he said, addressing the room. "Miss Eleanor was found at approximately 8 this morning, strangled with a silk cord. Dr. Trent estimates death occurred between midnight and 2 o'clock. I'll need to know where each of you was during that time." The responses came haltingly. Sir Reginald claimed to have been in his study, reviewing papers until 1 o'clock, then retiring to bed. Lady Beatrice said she had taken a sleeping draught and was in her room by 10. Captain Brooke, his voice tight, admitted to a late-night walk in the gardens, alone, around 11, but insisted he had seen nothing unusual. Dr. Trent, lighting a cigarette with unsteady hands, said he had been reading in his room, though he could not recall the exact hour he retired. Clara Vane, her eyes red-rimmed, declared she had been asleep by 10:30, exhausted from the evening's festivities. Gerald Warwick, his tone clipped, stated he had lingered in the library with a glass of brandy until midnight, then gone to bed. Poirot, standing near the window with his hands clasped behind his back, listened without interruption, his eyes darting from speaker to speaker. Hastings, accustomed to this, shown to my room by Mr. Grayson. I retired immediately, as the journey had been fatiguing. Hargreaves grunted, jotting a note. Convenient. Very well. You're all to remain here until we've searched the premises and taken formal statements. No one leaves the hall. As the inspector turned to confer with his sergeant, Poirot beckoned Hastings to a quiet corner. Mon ami, he murmured, the alibis, they are like a tapestry, woven with care, but already I see threads that do not align. The Captain Brooke, for instance, his walk in the gardens, it is too vague. And Mr. Warwick, his brandy in the library, why does he not mention the manuscript he was surely tempted to examine? Hastings frowned. You think they're lying? Lying, perhaps, or concealing, Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. The truth it hides in the spaces between their words. Come, let us take a turn about the hall. The police, they will search for footprints and fingerprints, but Hercule Poirot seeks the footprints of the mind. They slipped out of the drawing room, moving through the oak-panelled corridors towards the library, where Sir Reginald's collection of rare manuscripts was housed. The room was a scholar's dream. Shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a heavy desk littered with papers, and a glass case displaying illuminated manuscripts from the Renaissance. Poirot's gaze lingered on the case, where one manuscript, a 15th-century Book of Hours, stood slightly askew, its lock gleaming in the morning light. Curious, Poirot said, bending to examine the case without touching it. This lock, it is new, yet the case shows signs of tampering. A faint scratch here, as if someone attempted to force it open. Hastings peered over his shoulder. You think it's connected to the murder? Poirot straightened, his expression inscrutable. Everything, Hastings, is connected. The manuscript, the locket, the crushed rose, they are pieces of a puzzle. But the picture, it is not yet clear. Their inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Clara Vane, her face pale but composed. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low, I must speak with you. Privately, Poirot's eyebrows rose, but he gestured toward a near this with great care. As Clara retreated, Hastings whispered, Do you believe her? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I believe she saw something, mon ami. Whether it is the truth, or a truth she wishes us to believe, that is the question. Come, we return to the drawing room. The little grey cells, they are beginning to stir. As they rejoined the others, the air thick with suspicion and grief. Hastings felt the weight of Poirot's presence, a beacon of logic in a house shadowed by death. Blackthorn Hall was no longer a mere country estate. It was a battlefield of secrets, and Poirot was already mapping its terrain. Chapter 4. The interrogations begin. The drawing room of Blackthorn Hall had transformed into a stage of uneasy anticipation. Its opulent furnishings now overshadowed by the grim purpose that held its occupants captive. The guests, confined by Inspector Hargreaves's orders, sat in clusters, their whispered conversations punctuated by the occasional clink of a teacup or the rustle of a newspaper hastily set aside. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, appeared almost serene, his small hands folded neatly in his lap. But Captain Arthur Hastings knew better. Beneath that calm exterior, Poirot's little grey cells were working at a feverish pace, sifting through the morning's revelations. Inspector Hargreaves, his notebook now creased from constant use, had set up a makeshift interview station at a mahogany writing desk in the corner. A constable stood guard at the door, ensuring no one left the room without permission. The inspector's method was methodical but brusque, his questions sharp and direct, as if he hoped to startle the truth from his subjects. Poirot, however, observed with a different intent, his eyes darting from face to face, noting the flicker of a glance, the tightening of a jaw, the subtle shift in posture that betrayed more than words ever could. The first to be questioned was Sir Reginald Ashbourne, whose grief seemed to have hardened into a stoic resolve. "I was in my study until 1 o'clock, he repeated, his voice steady but his eyes hollow. "I was reviewing correspondence, letter."
Bearing on this tragedy, Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "Of course, monsieur. I merely seek to understand the context." Next came Lady Beatrice, her face pale beneath a layer of carefully applied powder. She clutched a lace handkerchief, her answers delivered in a voice that wavered between sorrow and defensiveness. "I took a sleeping draught at 10, as I always do," she said. "The house was quiet. I heard nothing, saw nothing. Eleanor she was troubled last night, but I thought it was merely nerves. Her engagement, you see, it was a strain." Hargreaves raised an eyebrow. "A strain? Was she unhappy with Captain Brooke?" Lady Beatrice's lips pursed. "Not unhappy, Inspector. But young women can be changeable. I thought she needed rest." Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the arm of his chair. "Madame, this sleeping draught, it is a regular habit, yes? And it renders you insensible to the sounds of the night?" Lady Beatrice met his gaze, her eyes sharp. "Quite insensible, Monsieur Poirot. I slept through until Grayson woke me this morning." As she returned to her seat, Poirot murmured to Hastings, "A convenient slumber, mon ami." Too convenient, perhaps. Captain Lionel Brooke was next, his military bearing strained by barely contained anguish. "I walked in the gardens at 11, he said, his voice clipped. "I needed air. Eleanor had been distant at dinner. I thought she might join me, but she didn't. I returned to my room by 11:30 and stayed there." Hargreaves pressed him. "You saw no one else in the gardens? Heard nothing?" Brooke's jaw clenched. "Nothing. It was dark and the wind was up. I wish to God I'd stayed with her." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Capitaine, this distance you speak of, had Mademoiselle Eleanor expressed any doubts about your engagement?" Brooke's eyes flashed. "That's personal, Monsieur Poirot. She was tired, that's all. We were to marry in the spring." Dr. Malcolm Trent. Argument in the conservatory. "Could you describe Mademoiselle Eleanor's tone? Angry? Frightened? Pleading?" Clara's cheeks flushed. "Frightened, I think." Her voice was high, unsteady. I couldn't make out the words, but she sounded desperate. Gerald Warwick, the financier, was the last of the guests, his dour demeanour unchanged. "I was in the library with a brandy until midnight," he said. "Then I went to bed. I saw no one, heard nothing." Poirot's voice was gentle but probing. "Monsieur Warwick, the library. It houses Sir Reginald's manuscripts. Did you perhaps examine them while you lingered?" Warwick's eyes hardened. "I'm no scholar, Monsieur Poirot." "I was there for the quiet, nothing more." As the interviews concluded, Hargreaves dismissed the guests to their rooms, save for Poirot and Hastings, whom he grudgingly allowed to remain. "You've a reputation, Poirot," he said, "but this is a straightforward case." That cord, the locket, the crushed rose, it points to a lover's quarrel gone wrong. Brooke's the obvious suspect. Poirot's smile was polite but firm. Obvious, Inspector, is often the enemy of truth. The cord, it is silk, yes? Not from the garden, not from a common source. And the locket, why break it and leave it behind? No, there is more here than meets the eye. As Hargreaves turned to his notes, Poirot led Hastings to the French doors overlooking the rose garden, now cordoned off by police tape. "Observe, Hastings," he said, his voice low. "The alibis, they are too neat, too uniform. Each guest claims solitude, yet someone was in that garden with Mademoiselle Eleanor. The truth, it lies in the contradictions we have not yet seen." Hastings frowned. "But who, Poirot? They all seem so plausible." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Plausible, mon ami, is not the same as true. We must dig deeper into the hearts, the motives, the secrets of Blackthorn Hall. The little grey cells, they are only beginning." With that peculiar intensity that Hastings knew signaled a breakthrough, or at least the scent of one. Inspector Hargreaves, his patience thinning, had latched on to Captain Lionel Brooke as the prime suspect, his theory bolstered by the silk cord found around Eleanor Ashbourne's neck. "It's from a dressing gown, no doubt," Hargreaves declared, brandishing a report from his sergeant. "Brooke was in the gardens at 11, admitted it himself. He's her fiancé, and they'd been arguing. Stands to reason he lost his temper." Poirot, polishing his pince-nez with a silk handkerchief, listened with an air of polite detachment. "Reason, Inspector, is a fine guide, but it must not blind us to the details. The cord, it is silk, yes, but of a particular weave, fine, almost feminine. Have you confirmed it belongs to Capitaine Brooke?" Hargreaves bristled. "We're searching his room now. If it's his, we'll find the gown it came from. Mark my words, Poirot, this is a crime of passion." Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Passion, perhaps, but not necessarily love. The heart, it can be stirred by many things: greed, fear, revenge. Let us see what the little grey cells uncover." As Hargreaves stormed off to oversee the search, Poirot beckoned Hastings to follow him to the conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with exotic ferns and the faint scent of damp earth. It was here, Clara Vane had claimed, that she overheard Eleanor arguing with an unseen figure the previous night. The conservatory was untouched by the police, its wicker chairs and potted palms lending an air of incongruous tranquility. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low as he examined the tiled floor. "Mademoiselle Vane spoke of an argument, yet she could not identify the other voice. Why then did she not approach? Was it fear, or something else?" Hastings frowned, peering at the floor where Poirot's gloved finger pointed to a faint scuff mark near a wicker table. "You think she's hiding something?" Poirot straightened, his eyes gleaming. "Everyone hides something, mon ami. The question is whether it is relevant. This mark, too small for a man's boot, too precise."
Poirot's. "I don't know. A quarrel, perhaps. Warwick's a cold fish, but he's got money troubles. Everyone knows it. Maybe Eleanor knew something he didn't want aired." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Merci, Doctor. Your observation is most valuable." As Trent retreated, Hastings whispered, "Do you believe him? It sounds like he's pointing the finger at Warwick to deflect suspicion." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A red herring, perhaps, but even a false trail can lead to truth."
Dr. Trent wishes us to look at Monsieur Warwick. Why? To protect himself or another? Their conversation was cut short by a commotion from the hall. Inspector Hargreaves burst into the conservatory, holding a folded silk dressing gown, its belt missing. "Found it in Brooke's room," he announced triumphantly. "The cord matches the one around Miss Eleanor's neck." "He's our man, Poirot." Poirot examined the gown, his fingers tracing the fabric with care. "It is similar, yes, but not identical. The weave, it is slightly coarser. And the gown, observe the hem. It is pristine, yet the cord around Mademoiselle Eleanor's neck was frayed, as if used roughly. No, Inspector, this is not the source." Hargreaves scowled. "You're splitting hairs, Poirot. Brooke was in the gardens. He had motive, and now we've got the gown." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The obvious. It is a trap, Inspector. Consider, why would Capitan Brooke leave such an incriminating item in his room, so easily found? It is too convenient, n'est-ce pas?" As Hargreaves muttered and retreated, Poirot led Hastings back to the drawing-room, where the guests were gathered under the constable's watchful eye. Clara Vane sat apart, her hands twisting in her lap, while Gerald Warwick stared out the window, his face a mask of grim resignation. Lady Beatrice, her eyes red from crying, clutched a rosary, while Sir Reginald paced near the fireplace, his earlier composure crumbling. Poirot paused, his gaze sweeping the room.
Already piecing together a puzzle that would soon unravel the secrets of Blackthorn Hall. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The late afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Hall, casting long shadows across the drawing-room, where the guests remained under the watchful eye of Inspector Hargreaves' constable. The air was thick with unease, each occupant seemingly lost in their own thoughts, yet bound by the shared specter of Eleanor Ashbourne's murder. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a marble-topped table, felt the tension like a taut wire, ready to snap. Hercule Poirot, however, appeared as composed as ever, his small hands adjusting the cuffs of his immaculate suit as he surveyed the room with the precision of a watchmaker. Inspector Hargreaves had doubled down on his theory that Captain Lionel Brooke was the culprit, citing the silk dressing gown found in his room and his admitted presence in the gardens near the time of the murder. Yet Poirot's dismissal of the gown as the source of the strangling cord had planted a seed of doubt in the inspector's mind, though he masked it with bluster. "We'll find more evidence, Poirot," Hargreaves had declared before storming off to oversee a search of the servants' quarters. "Brooke won't wriggle out of this." Poirot, undeterred, had turned his attention to the minutiae of the case, his little gray cells sifting through the details like a jeweler examining facets of a gem. He beckoned Hastings to join him in the library, where the air was heavy with the scent of old leather and polished wood. The glass case housing Sir Reginald's manuscripts stood as it had the previous day, its lock still bearing the faint scratch Poirot had noted earlier. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low and deliberate. "The clue. It is often in the smallest detail, the thing overlooked, the inconsistency that whispers truth. Regardez, this case." He pointed to the manuscript, the 15th century Book of Hours, its illuminated pages glowing faintly under the glass. "The scratch on the lock. It is deliberate, yet subtle. Someone wished to open this case, but why? And why leave it undisturbed?" Hastings frowned, peering at the lock. "You think it's connected to Eleanor's death? But the manuscripts—" Tone deceptively casual. "You have served the Ashbourne family for many years. Yes?" Grayson nodded, his eyes wary. 20 years, sir, since Sir Reginald inherited the hall. And you are observant, no? You see much that others do not. Tell me, last night, when you checked the locks at midnight, Did you notice anything unusual in the rose garden? Grayson's fingers tightened on the tray. Nothing, sir. The garden was dark, quiet. I saw no one. Poirot's smile was gentle but piercing. And yet Mademoiselle Eleanor was there, or soon would be. Curious, is it not, that a man so attentive should see nothing? Grayson's face paled, but he held Poirot's gaze. I did my duty, Monsieur Poirot. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. As the butler retreated, Poirot murmured to Hastings, "The cufflinks, Hastings. They are distinctive, yes? And the floral pattern. It resembles the petals of the crushed rose found beneath Mademoiselle Eleanor. A coincidence, perhaps. But Hercule Poirot does not believe in coincidences." Hastings' eyes widened. "You think Grayson's involved?" Poirot raised a hand. "I think nothing yet, mon ami. I observe. The cufflink, the locket, the scratch on the lock. These are threads in a tapestry. We must weave them together." Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from the hall. Inspector Hargreaves burst into the library, his face flushed with excitement. "Poirot! We found something in the servants' quarters, a scrap of silk, same weave as the cord. It was hidden in a maid's trunk, but she swears she knows nothing about it." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "A maid, you say? And which maid is this?" "Mary Collins," Hargreaves replied. "Young, nervous type. Says she's been with the family 6 months. We're bringing her in for questioning." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Bring her, Inspector, and let us see what she says." Mary Collins, a slight girl with wide eyes and trembling hands, was escorted into the library. Her apron was crumpled, and her voice quavered as she spoke. "I don't know how it got there, sir," she said.
Magic, no. But misdirection, perhaps. The silk. It is another red herring, or is it? We must consider. Why place it in the maid's trunk? To protect the true culprit? Or to confuse the investigation? Hastings rubbed his temples. "It's all getting muddled, Poirot. The gown, the silk, the locket, how does it fit together?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his eyes gleaming. "It fits, Hastings, because it must. The clue in detail, the cufflink, the locket, the scratch, each is a piece of the truth. But the truth, it is like a mosaic. We see only fragments now, but soon the picture will emerge." As they returned to the drawing room, where the guests sat in strained silence, Hastings felt the weight of Poirot's words. The Belgian detective's mind was a machine of precision, turning over every detail, every inconsistency. Blackthorn Hall, with its secrets and shadows, was yielding its truths slowly. But Poirot was relentless, and Hastings knew the mosaic of murder was beginning to take shape. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The evening shadows deepened over Blackthorn Hall, casting the drawing room in a somber glow as the guests gathered once more, their faces drawn with the strain of a day steeped in suspicion. The air was heavy with the scent of wax from flickering candles, and the distant howl of the moorland wind added a mournful note to the oppressive silence. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the grand piano, felt the weight of the unfolding tragedy, his mind racing to keep pace with the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot, who stood by the fireplace, his small figure radiating a quiet authority. Inspector Hargreaves, his patience fraying, had spent the afternoon interrogating the maid, Mary Collins, whose discovery of the silk scrap in her trunk had only deepened the mystery. Her tearful denials had done little to sway the inspector, who now paced the room, muttering about servants with secrets. Yet Poirot, as ever, seemed more intrigued by what was not said, his sharp green eyes flitting from guest to guest, cataloguing their every gesture. The atmosphere shifted when Sir Reginald,
faltering as she clutched her shawl, "I can't bear this any longer,"
she said, her voice trembling. "There's something you should know, something I didn't mention earlier. Eleanor, she confided in me a week ago, before this weekend. She was afraid of someone in this house." A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Beatrice's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Afraid? Of whom? Why did you not speak of this before?" Clara's cheeks flushed, but she held her ground. She wouldn't say who, only that she'd discovered something dangerous. She said it was about money and a betrayal. I thought she was being dramatic, but now... Her voice broke, and she sank back into her chair. Poirot stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Clara. "Mademoiselle Vane, this is most significant. You say Mademoiselle Eleanor spoke of a betrayal. Did she mention any names, any specifics, a letter perhaps, or a document?" Clara shook her head, her eyes glistening. "No, nothing specific. She was vague, nervous. She said she'd confront the person this weekend. I begged her to be careful, but she wouldn't listen." Hastings, watching from his corner, felt a chill. "Poirot," he whispered, "do you think she meant Warwick? Dr. Trent mentioned tension between them." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, mon ami, but Mademoiselle Vane's revelation, it is a spark in the dark. We must find what ignited it." The room grew tense as Gerald Warwick, his face a mask of controlled anger, leaned forward. "This is absurd," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Eleanor and I had no quarrel. If she was afraid, it wasn't of me. I'm a businessman, not a murderer." Poirot turned to him, his tone deceptively mild. "Monsieur Warwick, you are a man of finance, yes? And finance, it is often a motive for betrayal. Were you perhaps involved in any dealings with Mademoiselle Eleanor? Or with Sir Reginald's manuscripts?" Warwick's eyes flashed. "I told you I'm no scholar. I had no interest in those dusty books. And Eleanor, she was nothing to me but Sir..." Reginald stepped forward, his voice trembling with rage. "Lionel, you forget yourself. My wife adored Eleanor. How dare you suggest otherwise?" Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, let us not descend into chaos. The truth, it is not served by shouting. Capitaine Brooke, you speak of resentment. Did Mademoiselle Eleanor ever express discontent with her mother's expectations?" Brooke hesitated, his anger giving way to uncertainty. She felt pressured. Beatrice wanted the wedding to be grand, a spectacle. Eleanor wanted something simpler. They argued about it, but that's all. Poirot nodded, his eyes darting to Lady Beatrice, who sat rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Merci, Capitaine. Every detail. It builds the picture." As the guests dispersed to their rooms for the evening, Poirot drew Hastings aside, his voice low. "The lies, Hastings, they multiply like shadows. Mademoiselle Vane speaks of fear and betrayal, yet she waited until now to reveal it. Monsieur Warwick denies involvement, yet his eyes betray unease. And Lady Beatrice, her defense of herself, it is too quick, too sharp. There is a secret here, mon ami, and it is tied to Mademoiselle Eleanor's discovery." Hastings frowned, his mind racing. "But what could it be, Poirot? Money, you think? Or something to do with the manuscripts?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Both, perhaps, or neither. The locket, the cord, the crushed rose, they are clues. But the true clue is in the hearts of these people. Someone in this house knows what Eleanor discovered, and it cost her life. We must watch, Hastings, for the next lie will bring us closer to the truth." As the candles burned low and the hall settled into an uneasy night,
Hastings felt the weight of Poirot's words. The web of secrets was tightening, and he knew that Poirot, with his relentless logic, was already closing in on the thread that would unravel it all. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The second morning at Blackthorn Hall suspected a conspiracy between her and Brooke. Yet, Poirot, as Hastings knew, was pursuing a different path, one paved with the subtle inconsistencies of human behavior. The morning's proceedings were interrupted when Clara Vane, her face pale and her eyes red from sleeplessness, rose abruptly from her chair. "I can't do this any more," she said, her voice breaking as she clutched the armrest. "I've been lying, and it's eating me alive. I have to tell the truth about Eleanor, about what I heard." The room froze, every eye turning to the actress. Lady Beatrice's rosary slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. Sir Reginald's face darkened, while Gerald Warwick's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Captain Brooke stared at Clara, his expression a mix of confusion and dread. Even Dr. Malcolm Trent, usually composed, fumbled his cigarette case, sending it skittering across the table. Poirot set down his notebook, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Mademoiselle Vane, you have our attention. Speak, and let the truth breathe freely." Clara took a shuddering breath, her hands twisting the edge of her shawl. "I lied about not knowing who Eleanor was arguing with in the conservatory. I recognized the voice. It was Gerald, Mr. Warwick. They were speaking in low tones, but I heard Eleanor say something about debts and promises broken. She sounded angry, but also scared. I didn't want to say anything because I thought it would make things worse, but after what happened—" Her voice trailed off, and she buried her face in her hands. Warwick surged to his feet, his face flushed with indignation. "That's preposterous! I never spoke to Eleanor in the conservatory. Clara, you're mistaken, or you're lying to save your own skin." Clara's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "I'm not lying, Gerald. I heard you. You were pressing her about something. Money, I think. She said she wouldn't do it, that she'd tell her father everything." Poirot's voice cut through the rising voices, calm but commanding. "Monsieur Warwick, sit, if you please. Mademoiselle Vane, you are certain it was Monsieur Warwick's voice? The conservatory, it is dark. Manuscript from a magazine. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot." Before Poirot could respond, Lady Beatrice's voice, sharp and brittle, cut through the room. "Enough of this nonsense about manuscripts. Eleanor was murdered, and we're wasting time on books and debts. Lionel was in the gardens that night. He admitted it. Why isn't he in custody?" Brooke's fists clenched, but before he could retort, Dr. Trent spoke, his voice low and unsteady. "There's something else you should know," he said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I didn't want to say it, but Eleanor came to me 2 days ago asking about sedatives. She said she wasn't sleeping, that she was worried about something, someone watching her. I gave her a mild dose, but now I wonder if she knew she was in danger." The room fell silent, the weight of Trent's words settling like dust. Poirot's eyebrows rose, his fingers tapping lightly on his notebook. "Doctor, this is most significant. Did Mademoiselle Eleanor say who she feared, or what this danger might be?" Trent shook his head, his cigarette case forgotten in his hand. "She wouldn't say. Only that she felt trapped. I thought it was nerves, perhaps about the wedding. But now—" He trailed off, his face ashen. Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice barely a whisper. "Mon ami, the secrets, they unravel.
Mademoiselle Vane speaks of an argument. Dr. Trent of fear. And yet each revelation brings more questions. The locket, the cord, the crushed rose. They are pieces of a puzzle. But the heart of it lies in what Eleanor knew. Hastings nodded, his mind reeling. You think she was killed because of what she discovered? But what could it be? Poirot's smile was grim. That, Hastings, is what we must uncover. The emotional turning point, it has come. Mademoiselle Vane's confession, Dr. Trent's revelation. They are cracks in the facade. Soon, the truth will break through. As the guests... Chapter 9. The Trap. The atmosphere in Blackthorn Hall had grown taut as a bowstring by the third morning, the weight of Eleanor Ashbourne's murder pressing down on its inhabitants like a storm cloud ready to burst. The drawing room, once a haven of civility, now felt like a courtroom, with the guests casting wary glances at one another, their nerves frayed by suspicion and sleeplessness. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing near the French doors overlooking the rose garden, felt the tension coiled tighter with each passing hour. Hercule Poirot, however, remained a beacon of calm, his small figure seated at a writing desk, his notebook filled with meticulous jottings that only he could fully decipher. Inspector Hargreaves, his confidence shaken by Poirot's persistent dismantling of his theories, had doubled his efforts, focusing on Captain Lionel Brooke and the maid, Mary Collins. The silk cord and the dressing gown remained his chief evidence, but Poirot's insistence on the cord's unique weave had sown doubt. The inspector's latest discovery, a torn scrap of paper found in the rose garden, bearing the words, "Meet me at midnight," had only deepened the mystery, as no one could confirm its authorship. Poirot, sensing the moment was ripe, rose from his chair and addressed the room with a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice clear and measured, "the time has come to confront the shadows that haunt Blackthorn Hall. A young woman is dead, and the truth, it hides among us. I propose we gather this evening, here at 8 o'clock, to discuss what we know and what we do not. Each of you will speak, and Hercule Poirot will listen. The little gray cells, they are ready to unmask the guilty." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Lady Beatrice clutched her rosary, her lips moving silently, while Sir Reginald's face darkened with a mix of grief and apprehension. Clara Vane's hands trembled, and Gerald Warwick's eyes narrowed, his fingers tightening around his glass of brandy. Captain Brooke, his jaw set, nodded curtly, while Dr. Malcolm Trent lit another cigarette, his hand unsteady. Even Mr. Grayson, also a secret. Mademoiselle Eleanor knew something that threatened someone in this house. The locket, the cord, the crushed rose, they are all connected to this secret. Hastings frowned, his mind racing. You think it's about the manuscripts? But Warwick denies any interest, and Sir Reginald guards them like a dragon. Poirot nodded, his fingers tracing the air as if assembling an invisible puzzle. Oui, but what if the manuscripts are not the prize, but the key? A document, perhaps, hidden among them, a will, a contract, a confession. We must watch tonight, Hastings, for the one who fears exposure. The evening arrived, and at 8 o'clock the guests assembled in the drawing room, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of the chandelier. Poirot stood at the center, his small stature commanding the room as if he were a conductor before an orchestra. Inspector Hargreaves, grudgingly present, stood by the door, his notebook at the ready. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, "we are here to unravel the tragedy of Mademoiselle Eleanor. Each of you has a piece of the truth, whether you know it or not.
Let us begin with the night of the murder. Capitaine Brooke, you were in the gardens at 11. Did you see Mademoiselle Eleanor? Brooke's face flushed, but his voice was steady. I told you, I walked alone. I didn't see her. I wish I had. Poirot turned to Clara Vane. Mademoiselle, you heard an argument in the conservatory. You believe it was Monsieur Warwick. Are you certain now, in this moment? Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to Warwick. I thought it was him. The voice was low, harsh, but I can't swear to it. Warwick's lip curled. As I've said, it wasn't me. I was in the library. Poirot's gaze shifted to Lady Beatrice. Madame, you took a sleeping draught, yet Mademoiselle Eleanor spoke of fear, of a betrayal. Did she ever confide in you about her concerns? Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed with indignation. She was my daughter. If she was afraid, she would have told me. This talk of betrayal is nonsense. Poirot nodded, his expression uncored. The note that says, "Meet me at midnight." They point to a secret, a betrayal that cost a life. A gasp escaped Clara Vane, and Lady Beatrice's rosary clattered to the floor. Warwick's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the rug, while Brooke's fists clenched. Trent's cigarette fell, smoldering on the table. The room seemed to hold its breath, the silence deafening. Poirot's voice was soft but piercing. The guilty one, they are here among us. And tonight, they have felt the noose tighten. The truth, it will not stay hidden as the guests dispersed. Their faces pale and their eyes haunted. Hastings whispered, "You've rattled them, Poirot." But who's the target? Poirot's smile was grim. All of them, mon ami. The trap is set, and the guilty will stumble. We need only watch for the misstep. As the night closed in, Blackthorn Hall seemed to pulse with the weight of Poirot's words, the air charged with the promise of revelation. Hastings, his heart pounding, knew the endgame was near. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The drawing-room of Blackthorn Hall was suffused with a tense hush as the clock struck 9 on the third evening, the flickering chandelier casting long shadows across the faces of the gathered guests. The air was heavy with anticipation, each occupant perched on the edge of their seat, their eyes darting between one another and the small, immaculate figure of Hercule Poirot, who stood at the center of the room like a conductor, poised to unveil a symphony's finale. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fireplace, felt his pulse quicken, sensing that Poirot's trap, set so carefully the previous evening, was about to spring. Inspector Hargreaves, his notebook worn from constant use, stood by the door, his expression a mix of skepticism and grudging curiosity. The guests, Sir Reginald and Lady Beatrice Ashburn, Captain Lionel Brooke, Dr. Malcolm Trent, Clara Vane, Gerald Warwick, and the butler, Mr. Grayson, sat in a loose semicircle, their faces etched with varying degrees of fear, defiance, and exhaustion. The weight of Eleanor Ashburn's note, "Meet me at midnight," was found in the garden. These are not random details, no. They are the threads of a tapestry, woven by a killer who sought to hide a dangerous secret. Poirot turned to Sir Reginald, whose face was pale but resolute. "Monsieur Ashburn, your manuscripts are the heart of this mystery. The scratch on the lock of the case suggests someone sought access. Mademoiselle Eleanor, she knew something about these manuscripts, something that threatened the guilty." Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. "My manuscripts are private, Poirot. Eleanor had no interest in them." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "But she did, monsieur. She discovered a document hidden among them, a codicil to your will, perhaps, or a letter revealing a financial arrangement. This document, it was a danger to someone in this room." Lady Beatrice gasped, her rosaries slipping to the floor. "That's absurd. Eleanor would never meddle in such things."
Poirot's gaze shifted to her. Madame, you speak of your daughter's loyalty, yet you pressured her about her engagement. Mademoiselle Eleanor felt trapped, did she not? She confided in Dr. Trent about her fears, and in Mademoiselle Vane about a betrayal. She was preparing to confront someone. Clara Vane's hands trembled. I told you, I heard her arguing with Mr. Warwick in the conservatory. It was about money. Debts. Warwick surged to his feet, his face flushed. Lies! I never spoke to her there. I was in the library, as I said. Poirot's voice remained calm. Monsieur Warwick, your financial troubles are well known. You owed significant sums, and Sir Reginald's manuscripts, particularly the Book of Hours, are worth a fortune. But you are not the killer. No, your role was to distract, to be the red herring. Warwick froze, his anger giving way to confusion. Poirot turned to Captain Brooke. Capitaine, you loved Mademoiselle Eleanor, but she was pulling away. The note, meet me at midnight. Was it from you or to you? Brooke's face crumpled. I didn't write it. I swear I didn't see her that night. I was in the gardens earlier, but I went to bed. Poirot nodded.
Whom? The codicil in the manuscript case. It was a secret you guarded for Lady Beatrice. Mademoiselle Eleanor discovered it. A document that altered the inheritance, perhaps cutting her out in favor of another. She confronted you, did she not? In the rose garden, at midnight, Lady Beatrice let out a strangled cry, but Poirot pressed on. You, madam, knew of this codicil. You feared Eleanor's discovery would ruin your plans. You instructed Grayson, your loyal servant, to silence her. The locket was torn in the struggle, the rose crushed beneath her. The note was a lure, written by you to ensure she went to the garden. Lady Beatrice collapsed, sobbing. No, I loved her. I would never. Grayson stepped forward, his voice shaking but resolute. It was me, Monsieur Poirot. I acted alone. Miss Eleanor found the codicil, a letter proving Sir Reginald's debts to a creditor. She threatened to expose it, to ruin the family. I panicked. I took the cord from my old dressing gown and met her in the garden. I didn't mean to kill her, only to frighten her. But she fought and... He broke off, his face ashen. The room was silent, the truth hanging like a guillotine. Hargreaves, stunned, signalled to his constable, who moved to restrain Grayson. Lady Beatrice's sobs filled the air, while Sir Reginald stared at his wife, betrayal etched in his eyes. Poirot's voice was soft but firm. The little grey cells, they see what the heart conceals. Monsieur Grayson, your loyalty was your undoing. The codicil, the locket, the rose, they told the story of a desperate act. As Grayson was led away, Hastings whispered, How did you know, Poirot? The cufflinks, the cord, how did it all fit? Poirot's eyes twinkled. The details, mon ami. The rose matched Grayson's cufflinks, the cord was too specific to be random. And the codicil? Eleanor's fear pointed to a family secret. The truth, it always reveals itself to those who listen. As the guests dispersed, the weight of the revelation settling over them, Blackthorn Hall seemed to exhale. Its secrets laid bare. Poirot, his work done, turned to the window, his gaze distant, but his back as he gazed out at the moorland beyond. His notebook, now filled with the meticulous notes that had unraveled the mystery, lay closed on the desk beside him. The air was thick with the scent of old books and the faint tang of yesterday's sherry. But Poirot's presence brought a clarity that cut through the gloom. Hastings broke the silence, his voice low. Poirot, I still can't quite believe it. Grayson, of all people, a butler, so loyal, so unobtrusive. How did you see through it all? Poirot turned, his green eyes gleaming with a quiet satisfaction. Mon ami, the truth, it is always there, hidden in the details. The little grey cells, they observe what others overlook. The cufflinks, with their floral pattern, matched the crushed rose, a small thing, but significant.
The silk cord, too fine for a man's dressing gown, pointed to something personal, intimate, and the locket, broken, yet not stolen, suggested a struggle born of desperation, not greed. Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. But Lady Beatrice, did she truly know nothing of Grayson's actions? She seemed so shattered. Poirot's lips curved into a faint, melancholic smile. Madame Beatrice, she is a woman of pride and control. The codicil, it was her secret, a plan to secure the estate's future, perhaps to protect Sir Reginald's debts from exposure. But she did not foresee that Mademoiselle Eleanor would discover it, nor that Grayson, her loyal servant, would take such drastic measures to protect her. Whether she suspected his actions, we may never know. The heart, it guards its own truths. Hastings leaned back, his mind turning over the events. And Warwick? Clara's accusation, Trent's hints, were they just distractions? Poirot nodded. Red herrings, mon ami, but each served a purpose. Monsieur Warwick's debts made him a convenient suspect. And Mademoiselle Vane's story of the conservatory argument, it was a half-truth, born of fear and guilt. She heard something, yes, but her imagination filled the gaps. Dr. Trent, too, saw Eleanor's fear, but did not understand its source. Each added a piece.
Serene. Oui, Inspector. My work here is done. Blackthorn Hall has given up its secret, and Hercule Poirot, he must return to his little comforts in London. As Hargreaves departed, Hastings rose, his expression thoughtful. You know, Poirot, you always talk about your little grey cells, but it's more than that. You see people, their fears, their motives. It's almost uncanny. Poirot chuckled softly, adjusting his tie with a precise flick. Not uncanny, mon ami, merely methodical. The mind, it is a mirror of the soul. To understand one, you must study the other. This case, it was not about manuscripts or money, but about loyalty twisted into betrayal. Mademoiselle Eleanor, she was the victim of a heart that loved too fiercely. Hastings sighed, glancing at the glass case where the manuscript stood, now a silent witness to the tragedy. It's a grim business, Poirot. Poor Eleanor. She deserved better. Poirot nodded, his gaze softening. She did, Hastings. But the truth, it is her justice. And now, we leave Blackthorn Hall to heal its wounds. As they prepared to depart, Poirot took one last look around the library, his eyes lingering on the scratched lock, the silent manuscripts, the echoes of a crime now laid bare. The hall, with its grandeur and its secrets, seemed to sigh in relief, as if grateful for the clarity Poirot had brought. Hastings followed his friend out, the weight of the case lifting with each step, though the memory of Eleanor's fate would linger. Poirot paused at the threshold, his voice low. The world, Hastings, it is full of shadows. But the little grey cells, they bring light. Always they bring light. With that, they stepped into the waiting car, leaving Blackthorn Hall to its ghosts and its grief, as the moorland wind carried the echoes of a mystery solved. Chapter 12. The Echoes of Truth. The departed kill to protect it. Hastings frowned, his thoughts returning to the library's glass case. You said it was about Sir Reginald's debts, but was it really just that?
Eleanor seemed so determined to expose it. Surely there was more at stake. Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "You are perceptive, Hastings. The codicil. It was not merely a matter of debts, but a revelation that threatened the very foundation of the Ashburn family. Let us consider. What if the letter revealed not only debts, but a secret transaction, one that implicated another in this house, a transaction that Mademoiselle Eleanor could not abide?" Hastings's eyes widened. "You mean someone else was involved? But Grayson said he acted alone." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "He said so, oui, but loyalty, it is a powerful shield. Grayson, he protects someone, perhaps Lady Beatrice, perhaps another. The little gray cells, they suggest a possibility. The codicil named a beneficiary, someone who stood to gain from Sir Reginald's financial ruin. And Eleanor, she was prepared to expose this." The car jolted slightly over a rough patch of road, and Hastings gripped the seat, his mind racing. "But who, Poirot? Warwick? He's got money troubles, but you cleared him. Trent? Clara? Surely not Sir Reginald himself." Poirot's gaze returned to the window, his voice soft but resolute. "Not Sir Reginald, no. But consider Lady Beatrice. Her reaction last night, her collapse, her tears, they were not only grief, but fear. Fear that her role in this secret would come to light. The codicil, it may have been her creation, a desperate act to secure the estate, perhaps by selling a manuscript to a creditor. Eleanor's discovery threatened to unravel it all." Hastings shook his head, struggling to keep up. "But Grayson took the blame. Why would he do that if Lady Beatrice was behind it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Loyalty, mon ami. Grayson, he has served the Ashburns for 20 years. To him, Lady Beatrice is the heart of the family, the one who holds it together. He would kill to..." The codicil. She forced the shadows into the light, even at the cost of her life. Hercule Poirot, he does not forget such courage. As they stepped onto the platform, the train's whistle pierced the air, signaling their departure from Devonshire. Hastings glanced back towards the distant silhouette of Blackthorn Hall, its towers swallowed by the mist. "Do you think they'll recover, Poirot? The Ashburns, I mean. After all this?" Poirot's gaze followed Hastings, his voice low but firm. "The heart, it is resilient, but it carries scars. The Ashburns will endure, but they will never be the same. The truth, it changes all who touch it." The train pulled in, its steam curling into the damp air. As they boarded, Hastings felt a sense of closure, though tinged with melancholy. Poirot, settling into his seat with a contented sigh, opened his notebook, his fingers tracing the final entry. Blackthorn Hall was behind them, its secrets laid bare. But the echoes of Eleanor's fate would linger, a reminder of the delicate balance between loyalty and betrayal that Poirot had so masterfully unraveled. Chapter 13. The Unseen Thread. The train rattled through the English countryside, its steady rhythm a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions that lingered in Captain Arthur Hastings' mind. The rolling hills outside the window, cloaked in the soft grey of an autumn afternoon, seemed to blur into the haze of Blackthorn Hall's grim revelations. Beside him, Hercule Poirot sat with his usual impeccable poise, his small hands folded over his closed notebook, his eyes half closed as if in meditation. Yet Hastings knew his friend's mind was far from idle. The little grey cells were still weaving the final threads of the case. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low to avoid disturbing the other passengers, "I can't shake the feeling that we've missed something." Grayson's confession tied up the loose ends. But Lady Beatrice, her reaction still troubles me. Was she truly ignorant of Grayson's actions? Or is there more we haven't seen? Poirot opened his eyes, his gaze sharp and penetrating. Monad
Interests, perhaps at the expense of others. Mademoiselle Eleanor's discovery threatened not only the family's honor, but Lady Beatrice's control. Hastings frowned, trying to follow Poirot's reasoning. Control? You mean over the estate, or something personal? Poirot's smile was faint, but knowing. Both, perhaps. The codicil. It was a letter detailing Sir Reginald's debts, but what if it also named a beneficiary, someone who stood to gain if the estate were sold or its assets liquidated? Lady Beatrice, she is a woman of ambition, one who values appearances. If Eleanor intended to expose this, it would unravel not only the family's finances, but Lady Beatrice's carefully constructed world. Hastings' eyes widened. You think she orchestrated it? Not just Grayson acting alone? Poirot raised a hand, his expression cautious. Orchestrated? No, but aware, perhaps. Lady Beatrice is no murderer, but she is a woman who knows how to wield influence. Grayson, her loyal servant, acted to protect her. But did she know of his plan? The little gray cells, they suggest she suspected more than she admitted. Her collapse, her tears, they were genuine, but also a shield. The train lurched slightly, and Hastings gripped the armrest, his mind racing. But why would Grayson take the fall so completely? If Lady Beatrice was involved, why not implicate her? Poirot's gaze softened, almost melancholic. Loyalty, mon ami, is a powerful force. For Grayson, Lady Beatrice was the heart of Blackthorn Hall, the one who held the family together through years of Sir Reginald's recklessness. To protect her, he would sacrifice himself. And she, knowing this, allowed it, for the sake of the family, or for her own survival. Hastings shook his head, the weight of the revelation settling over him. It's monstrous, Poirot. To let a man confess to murder to protect her secrets, it's almost as bad as the act itself. Poirot nodded, his voice low. The human heart, it is capable of great darkness, Hastings, but also of great sacrifice. Grayson's confession, it closes the case, but it leaves us with questions of morality. Did Lady Beatrice know? Her death, it is a tragedy, but her courage, it is her legacy. The truth, it has been served, even if imperfectly. As the train pulled away from the station, Hastings felt a quiet resolve settle over him. Poirot's words, as always, carried a weight that transcended the case itself. Blackthorn Hall was fading into the distance, but the unseen thread, the delicate balance of loyalty, betrayal, and truth, would linger in his mind. A reminder of the complexities Poirot so masterfully navigated. Chapter 14. The Final Pieces. The train's rhythmic clatter had given way to the gentle hum of London's outskirts as Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings neared their destination. The grey light of the late afternoon seeped through the carriage window, casting a soft glow on Poirot's immaculate suit and his ever-present notebook, now tucked into his coat pocket. Hastings, still grappling with the lingering questions from Blackthorn Hall, shifted in his seat, his expression a mix of curiosity and unease. "Poirot," he said, his voice hushed to match the quiet of the nearly empty carriage. "I can't help but feel we've left something unresolved. Grayson's confession, Lady Beatrice's secrets. It all fits, but there's a piece missing, isn't there? Something we haven't seen." Poirot's eyes, sharp and reflective, met Hastings. "You are correct, mon ami. The case is closed, the murderer confessed. But the heart of Blackthorn Hall beats with secrets that do not yield so easily. The little grey cells, they continue to stir. For there is one final piece, a motive that lies not in the act,
but in the silence that followed. Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "You mean Lady Beatrice's role? You hinted she might have known more than she let on. But if Grayson took the blame to protect her, why didn't she speak up? Why let him sacrifice himself?" Poirot's fingers traced the edge of his moustache, a gesture Hastings knew signaled deep contemplation. "Lady Beatrice, she is a woman of contradictions, grieving mother, yet calculating protector of her family's legacy. The codicil, it was position, grieving mother, untarnished by scandal. It is a cold choice, but one born of survival." Hastings shook his head, the moral weight of it settling heavily. "That's monstrous, Poirot. To let a man hang for her sake, it's almost as bad as the murder itself." Poirot nodded, his gaze distant. "The human heart, it is capable of great darkness, Hastings, but also of great sacrifice. Grayson chose his path, knowing the cost. Lady Beatrice, she chose hers, knowing the price. The final piece of this puzzle is not a fact, but a truth, the lengths to which loyalty can drive us, and the shadows it casts." The train slowed as it approached Victoria Station, the platform bustling with the evening crowd. Poirot adjusted his hat, his movements precise and deliberate. "We cannot prove Lady Beatrice's complicity, mon ami. The codicil is with the police, Grayson's confession is complete. But the little grey cells, they see the unseen, the glance she gave Grayson as he was led away, the tremor in her hand when the codicil was mentioned. These are the final pieces, the ones that complete the picture." Hastings sighed, his mind still turning over the events at Blackthorn Hall. "And the others? Warwick, Clara, Trent? Were they just caught in the web?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Each played a role, Hastings. Monsieur Warwick's debts made him a convenient distraction. Mademoiselle Vane's half-truths about the conservatory argument sowed confusion, and Dr. Trent's observation of Eleanor's fear added depth to the mystery. But they were not the heart of it. The heart was in the family, Eleanor's courage, Lady Beatrice's secrecy, Grayson's fatal loyalty. As they stepped onto the platform, the noise of London enveloped them. Car horns, the chatter of passers-by, the clatter of porters' carts. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who seemed almost rejuvenated by the city's energy. "What now, Poirot? Back to your flat, a cup of tisane and another case?" Poirot chuckled softly, his voice warm. "Oui, mon ami. The world, it is full of mysteries, and Hercule Poirot, he is never idle." But Hastings' mind, a tapestry of loyalty and betrayal that refused to fade. Poirot, seated beside him, seemed almost serene, his small hands resting on his cane, his eyes reflecting the city's lights with a quiet satisfaction. The case was closed, the murderer confessed. Yet Hastings sensed that Poirot's mind was still turning over the final echoes of the mystery. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice soft against the clatter of the cab. "It's done, isn't it? Grayson's confession, the codicil, Lady Beatrice's silence. There's nothing left to uncover. And yet I feel unsettled, as if we've left something behind." Poirot turned, his moustache twitching with a faint smile. "Mon ami, you have the heart of a true detective, always seeking the final note of the symphony. The case of Mademoiselle Eleanor, it is resolved, oui. But the human soul, it leaves ripples. You feel the echoes of Blackthorn Hall, the grief, the secrets, the choices that shaped this tragedy." Hastings nodded, his gaze drifting to the passing city. "It's Lady Beatrice, I suppose. Her silence, letting Grayson take the blame, it's so cold. Could she really have known nothing of his plan?" Poirot's eyes gleamed, his voice low and deliberate. "Cold, perhaps, but calculated. Lady Beatrice, she is a woman who understands power, the power of silence, of loyalty, of appearances. The codicil, it was her shield, protecting the Ashburn name from ruin. Mademoiselle Eleanor's discovery threatened that shield, and Grayson, her faithful shadow, acted to preserve it. Did Lady Beatrice know he would kill? Perhaps not. But did she suspect he would go to great lengths? The little grey cells, they say, we. Hastings frowned, the moral complexity knotting his thoughts. It's monstrous, Poirot. To let a man sacrifice himself, to let him hang for her sake. It's almost as if she's complicit. Poirot's expression grew sombre, his fingers tightening on his cane. Complicity, mon ami, is a matter of the heart, not the law. Lady Beatrice did not tie the cord around.
Ascended the steps to Poirot's flat. The door opened to reveal the comforting warmth of his sitting room, where a fire crackled and a tray of tisane awaited. Poirot settled into his armchair, his movements as deliberate as ever, and gestured for Hastings to join him. The world, it moves on, mon ami. Blackthorn Hall will heal, though its scars will remain. Sir Reginald, he will grapple with his debts and his grief. Lady Beatrice, she will carry her silence like a burden. And we return to our lives, enriched by the lessons of this case. Hastings sank into a chair, the warmth of the fire easing the chill of his thoughts. Lessons, Poirot. What lessons do we take from such a grim affair? Poirot sipped his tisane, his eyes distant but warm. That the human heart, it is both fragile and fierce. Mademoiselle Eleanor's courage, it shone brightly, even in death. Grayson's loyalty, it was his undoing, yet also his honor. And Lady Beatrice's silence, it reminds us that truth is often a choice, not a given. The little grey cells, they solve the puzzle, but the heart, it understands the cost. Hastings smiled faintly, the weight of the case lifting slightly. You make it sound almost poetic, Poirot. But I suppose that's your gift. Finding meaning in the chaos. Poirot's smile was radiant, his voice soft but firm. The chaos, mon ami, is merely a puzzle waiting for order. Hercule Poirot, he brings that order, always. As the fire crackled and the city hummed beyond the windows, Hastings felt a sense of closure settle over him. Blackthorn Hall was behind them, its secrets laid bare, its tragedy resolved. Yet the lessons of loyalty, betrayal, and truth would linger, as enduring as Poirot's unyielding pursuit of justice. With a final glance at his friend, Hastings raised his cup, silently toasting the man whose little grey cells had once again illuminated the shadows.